Hello, book lovers, and thanks for listening. I post new chapters every week. If you like my work, please remember to like and subscribe to help me build my channel. The Stillwater Girls by Minka Kent. Narrated by Jennifer Schafer. Chapter 40. Nicolette. I sit with the girls after Deputy May and Sharon Gable leave. Wren's expression is unreadable, her clear eyes frozen as she stares at the floor. I'd give anything to know what's going through her mind right now, if only so I could help her. Sage hasn't stopped weeping, her sweet face buried in her hands. Brant hasn't said a word, though he left for a moment to retrieve a box of tissues from the other room. My heart aches for them more than I ever could have anticipated. I barely know them, but their pain is real, palpable, and infectious. The only mother they've ever known is dead. Evie is still missing. Their entire world has been turned upside down. It'd be impossible to so much as attempt to imagine what's going through their minds. So I sit between them, slip my arms around their little shoulders, and offer unspoken sympathy. Sage, you should lie down, Wren says, standing. Reaching for her sister's hand, she leads her upstairs, and I hear her say, I can hold you the way Mama used to, if you want me to. As soon as they're gone, Brant and I lock eyes from across the room, both of us knowing there's a conversation to finish, one that has been simmering for the past half hour. I hate to bring this up now, my husband says, after what just happened, but I think you have it all wrong. Folding my arms across my chest, I ask, What? What do I have wrong? Do you think I cheated on you, Nick? He asks. Brant winces, like this is painful for him, like he's gearing up to play the victim of an unfortunate misunderstanding. Bullshit. Why else would you be sending money to a woman named Beth and hiding a photo of a girl who looks exactly like you? Do you think I'm an imbecile? He must if he's been pulling the wool over my eyes for 9 damn years. His mouth twitches up at one side, but only for a second. Nick. He walks toward me, his arms out. A second later, his hands rest on the sides of my arms. You have it all wrong. Then set me straight. The little girl, he asks before pausing a moment. She's ours. I jerk away from him. He's lying. This isn't possible. A million things I want to say rush through my mind, mingling together and losing their strength in an undercurrent of my anger. I've never felt so disrespected by anyone in my life. For him to think I could possibly believe any of this is the most audaciously manipulative thing my husband has ever done. My entire body tightens, and while I want to look at Brant, I can't. The mere thought of it makes my stomach twist into 1,000 tiny knots, each one a painful reminder that my life, our life, has been a lie. And Beth in New York, he says, clearly insistent on keeping up this charade. She's the FBI agent assigned to our case. Has been from the beginning. She knows the whole story. You're insane if you think I'm going to believe that. I force myself to meet his pathetic gaze, drawn by the rare flavor of desperation in his voice. He lifts his palms for a moment before letting them fall at his sides. I should be the speechless one, not him. I had a hysterectomy, I remind him, lest he forgot. I can't get pregnant. You were pregnant, once, he says, voice low and gentle. He comes to me, pulling me close, despite my arms being crossed tight against my chest. You didn't know you were. I didn't either. It was one of those, I don't know, those medically rare things where you were still getting your period and just thought you'd put on a little bit of weight.
Plus, with your height, you really didn't show. Anyway, after the delivery, you started hemorrhaging. The doctors couldn't stop the bleeding. That's why you had the hysterectomy.
I drag his musky scent into my lungs, sensing the way he studies me, like he's looking for a light to go on, something to click, a sign that I remember, that I believe him. But I hold my cards close, not wanting to seem gullible, not wanting to cling to something so far-fetched, all because of the earnest look in my husband's watery eyes.
I came home after running into town one night. You were lying on the bathroom floor in a pool of your own blood, unconscious. Scariest moment of my life, Nick. I called 911.
He stares to the side, chewing the inner corner of his bottom lip as he loses himself in thought for a moment.
When we got you to the hospital, they discovered that you were in labor.
How can a mother have no recollection of giving birth? I'm not just asking Brent. I'm asking myself. Closing my eyes, I try to force myself to remember something, anything, but everything is blank. I have zero recollection of any of this,
You were traumatized, fading in and out of consciousness.
he says.
You could have died. She could have died. We blinked and our whole lives had changed. To say it was all surreal would be an understatement. In a lot of ways, it was like a dream. Still feels that way.
Did I hold her? I ask. Not that I fully believe him yet, but I feel compelled to ask in case it helps to jog my memory. After she was born, his green eyes dampen.
Yeah, Nick, you held her.
His expression flattens, and he clears his throat.
That's when you started hemorrhaging. They couldn't get it to stop. Next thing I knew, the room filled with more nurses, and they were wheeling you down to the OR for an emergency hysterectomy.
I don't understand why I can't recall any of this, I say, though I'm trying. I'm trying like hell, fighting through a mental fog I never knew existed, one I'm still not sure exists. I rest my palm against my lower belly, as if that could possibly help me to remember, as if I might possibly feel something I hadn't felt before. But nothing. Brant observes me from his side of the room.
I don't know why you don't, Nick.
I think a woman would remember giving birth,
You don't understand.
he says before pausing.
You were in shock. Physically, emotionally, you were exhausted. You were traumatized.
I take a step back and release a short, incredulous laugh. I'm sorry. This just seems so. I don't finish my thought. I don't need to. He knows I don't buy this.
I can show you the medical records. I have a copy of your file in my studio. I kept them for this, I suppose.
His eyes plead with mine as he wears a painful wince on his chiseled face.
And you can ask Kate, or talk to your parents. They'll tell you everything you need to know.
Kate knew? My parents knew? The pitch of my voice rises, and the back of my throat burns. I need to remember the girls are upstairs. They don't need to hear us. I don't want to upset them. They've already been through so much.
Yes, Nick, they know.
Why would the four of you keep this from me? I run a hand through my hair, turning away and struggling to breathe despite the massive weight on my chest. Brant steps toward me, slow and careful.
When we took the baby home, you sometimes forgot about her. You had no recollection of her birth. I had to set timers on your phone so you'd remember to feed her when I was gone. And then you were hearing voices. Voices that told you you were a horrible mother who didn't deserve her.
I clap a hand over my mouth, trying to imagine the young, terrified woman I once was. She feels like a stranger, and trying to recall these things feels as impossible as trying to experience someone else's memories. But my heart goes out to her just the same.
You cried, constantly, and when you weren't crying, you were sleeping.
Pinching the bridge of his straight nose, Brent continues.
One day that first week, I came home from running to town for more formula, and you were standing at the end of the driveway with the stroller. I thought maybe you'd taken her for a walk, for some fresh air, which I thought was odd because you were supposed to be recovering from your surgery. But it was an unusually warm day for that time of year. Only when I got closer, there was this dead look in your eyes, and when I looked down, the stroller was empty.
Oh God, the nightmares all these years weren't nightmares after all. They weren't a barren woman's metaphor. They were memories.
I ran inside, tearing the house apart looking for Hannah, our baby, but she was gone.
His voice fractures and his eyes turn glassy. I've never seen my husband this choked up.
She was only 10 days old.
Brant lets me go, taking a seat on the sofa and resting his elbows on his knees. Hannah. My gaze scans my husband. Hannah was always the name I'd secretly held in the back of my mind for a someday child. In the early days of our relationship, when we'd half-heartedly talk about having kids one day, I refused to mention I'd already chosen names for them. Hannah for a girl, Jonah for a boy. I distinctly recall not wanting to scare him away, not wanting him to think I was one of those women who have their entire lives scripted out, and they're just waiting for a man to come along to play the part of their husband. It makes sense that if we did have a daughter, I'd insist on calling her Hannah. That, or it's an awfully strange coincidence.
You said you'd given her to some woman at the park by the woods,
He says.
You didn't know her name. You couldn't even remember what she looked like. You said the voices told you to do it.
I take the cushion beside him. I'm going to call Kate and ask her, I say.
By all means.
His answer is quick, and he clasps one hand on his knee while the other soars through the air.
In fact, I wish you would, so you could see I'm not making any of this up. And while you're at it, I'll grab your file so you can go over all the doctor's reports, the tests, the evaluations.
I tuck a strand of hair behind my ear and swallow the heavy nodule in my dry throat. Brand has never been one to call my bluff. He wants me to fact-check everything he's just told me. I imagine it's an enormous weight off his shoulders, having carried this burden alone for nearly a decade. I'll call my parents after, I add, on the off chance the two of them are in on this together. I want him to know I'm going to check under every stone. My parents would never betray me.
Of course. And you should. We've all been waiting for the right time to tell you this.
He says.
Kate thought you should know right away. Your parents and I made the decision to wait a little longer. As the years passed, it was easier just to sweep it under the rug a little longer and a little longer. Hannah was gone. What good would it have done to tell you years after the fact, when there was nothing that could be done, when it would only force you to experience that trauma all over again? We'd lost you once, Nick. We were scared to lose you a second time.
Brent covers my hand with his before giving it a soft squeeze. Who else knows about this? I ask, lifting trembling fingers to my lips as our eyes hold. I never knew it was possible to feel guilt and shame over something I have no recollection of doing.
Everyone, Nick. Everyone knows. We reported her missing,
He says.
Your parents came immediately. Kate took the next flight out. The whole town was turned upside down, everyone looking for her.
I'm going to be sick. All these years, I haven't just been an outsider. I've been the crazy lady who gave her newborn infant to a stranger and carried on like nothing happened. No wonder they stare. No wonder they want nothing to do with me. No wonder I made that woman at the grocery store uncomfortable just by looking at her child. I'm a monster. How could I have done something like this? I ask. My chest is on fire, my stomach in knots. I don't want to believe this, but while my mind still refuses to remember, my gut tells me Brant speaks the truth. I see it in his eyes. I feel it in the gravity of his words and the invisible heaviness that lingers in the space between us.
The doctors diagnosed you with postpartum psychosis,
He says.
and that, coupled with the traumatic delivery, the stress to your body, the hormonal imbalance from the birth and the hysterectomy, and once you realized what you'd done with Hannah, you snapped, Nick. We had you committed at the advice of Dr. Dudney, and you went voluntarily. You were an inpatient for 6 weeks while they adjusted your meds until you finally stopped hearing voices. But when you came home, you had no recollection of anything that happened as it pertained to the baby. The doctor said you had dissociative amnesia. It happens when we've been through traumatic events, or when we've gone through something overwhelmingly stressful or emotionally painful. He said your mind blocked it out as a coping mechanism. That had a lot to do with why we weren't in a hurry to remind you of what you'd just been through.
It makes sense, then, that he was overly concerned with my staying in New York for the winter. I bet he's lived in silent fear of me having an episode or a breakdown for the past 10 years. It was never about the winter blues, always about what had transpired that unusually warm week in December. Why didn't they put me behind bars? I ask. It has to be some kind of crime to just give your baby away like that.
You were sick, Nicolette.
He says, taking my hand in his.
And that woman, the one who took the baby, she's the criminal here, not you. She should have called for help. Instead, she took advantage of your situation and stole our child.
My lips tremble. How could you stand by me after what I did? I stare into the sea-green gaze of a man who's held on to an ocean of secrets so turbulent they could have drowned him. It must have pained him to see me carrying on, no recollection whatsoever, while he lived with knowing every last detail of what went down. If that isn't love, I don't know what is.
It wasn't always easy,
He says.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it was, to share everything with you, except that. My God, Nicolette, it killed me. But I was willing to live with the pain so you didn't have to. You'd already been through so much. No sense in both of us suffering. I love you more than you could ever know, my darling.
He buries his face in my lap, a moving sight, and I place my hand on the back of his head, twisting his sandy hair between my fingers before sliding my palm to the side of his face. Can you forgive me? He glances up. Our eyes lock. We have to find her. My words quiet to a whisper. Forgiveness is irrelevant. If what he's saying is the truth, he did nothing wrong. The only thing he's guilty of is protecting me from myself.
All this time I had no idea if she was still alive. After the leads cooled and the police stopped looking, and the FBI agents went back to their posts, Beth would call with updates when she had any. Over the years, those calls were fewer and farther between. But 2 months ago, someone mailed me this picture.
Reaching into his wallet, he produces the photo I'd found in his sock drawer.
The age matched up. She looks just like us, Nick. And she's got your same lips, your chin, even your ears. And those eyes. Those are my eyes.
I study the photo, almost as though I'm looking at it for the first time all over again. And I see it now. In fact, I'm not sure how I couldn't see it before. She's just as much me as she is him.
First came the picture,
He says.
then requests for money. They were extorting me, threatening to remind you about Hannah and about your role in her disappearance. And I wanted to be the one to tell you, Nick. I didn't want you to find out this way. I didn't know if it might set you off again.
So that's why you were taking money from my trust.
They said if I paid them, they'd give us Hannah. But then they kept asking for more, dragging it out. At one point, Beth wanted to stop because she thought we were being conned. But I refused. I kept looking at that picture, and I knew Nick. I knew she was ours. And I knew whoever was behind this had to be from the area, had to be someone who knows us, Someone who knows what happened 9 years ago and how we've dealt with it.
You mean how I dealt with it? He says nothing at first, reluctant to answer, or maybe frozen in thought. Then,
Yeah.
so whoever it is, it has to be someone we know, I ask. Brent lifts a shoulder.
It could be anyone around here. Everyone in Stillwater knows us, knows what happened, knows that you forgot.
He says,
I thought I could handle this all on my own, and I'd deal with everything else once we had her in our arms again. Everything else seemed so trivial at the time. All I could think about was getting her back.
the photo of the little girl rests between my fingers. I flip it around, studying her angelic face and those haunting sea-green irises.
Nick, those pictures that Wren drew,
He says,
there was one that looked just like her. Wren said it was her sister. I think there's a chance Evie might be our Hannah.
Brent rises, dragging his palm along his smooth jaw as he moves toward one of the windows that overlooks the forest.
Maybe that lady who took her was the same one raising these girls off the grid.
A raw emptiness burns and swells inside me. I never knew I could miss something this hard. I could suffer a void so real and deep. All this time I had a daughter, and I gave her away. End of chapter 40.